From 1993 to 1996, Ken Shamrock did not just fight in the UFC. He became one of the first men the UFC could build mythology around. This is the complete early arc, the scary debut, the shocking lesson, the title win, the grinding defenses, the monster matchup, and the controversial loss that changed his run. Before the UFC became polished, Ken Shamrock looked like an answer to the chaos. He had wrestling, shoot fighting, leg locks, chokes, and the kind of stare that made the nickname believable. This was before modern weight classes, before standard gloves, and before the sport had a clear blueprint. Shamrock was one of the first complete threats. At UFC 1 in Denver, Ken Shamrock's first opponent was Patrick Smith. Smith wanted distance, kicks, and impact. Shamrock wanted contact. The opening exchange tells the story fast. Smith throws, Shamrock ducks under, closes the range, and drags the fight into the exact world where a kickboxer least wants to be. Once Patrick Smith is on the mat, Ken Shamrock starts showing why he is different from the usual tough man field. He controls position, lands enough strikes to make Smith react, then spins to the leg. The heel hook at 1049 is the first real Shamrock warning shot. He can hurt you from places you do not understand. Then the same night turns on Ken Shamrock. In the semi-final, Royce Gracie is not bigger, louder, or more intimidating. He is calmer. Royce closes distance, turns the scramble into jiu-jitsu, and catches Shamrock in 57 seconds. For the crowd, it is shocking. For Shamrock, it becomes the problem he has to solve. The Royce Gracie loss matters because Shamrock was not ignorant on the ground. He already understood submissions, and Royce still caught him almost instantly. That is what makes the moment brutal. Shamrock does not just lose a fight, he learns that strength, urgency, and confidence can all disappear when the position belongs to someone else. By UFC 5, Ken Shamrock gets the rematch with Royce Gracie, and the energy is completely different. The first fight was a flash, the second fight becomes a grind. Shamrock is more cautious, more patient, and clearly fighting like a man who has watched that 57-second loss over and over. Against Royce Gracie at UFC 5, Shamrock chooses control. He stays heavy, avoids reckless openings, and refuses to give Royce the clean submission entries that ended the first meeting. It is not always pretty, but strategically it is huge. Shamrock shows that Royce can be slowed down, smothered, and neutralized. The UFC 5 draw leaves fans frustrated because nobody gets the clean ending. But that frustration is the point. Ken Shamrock versus Royce Gracie exposed a problem in the early format. What happens when two elite fighters can survive each other? The sport needed clearer judging, better structure, and a way to reward control. Then comes UFC 6, where Ken Shamrock meets Dan Severn. Severn is the Beast, a huge wrestler with a suffocating top game. If Severn gets on top and settles, Shamrock can be trapped under a much bigger man. If Shamrock catches the neck on the entry, the whole fight can flip instantly. That is exactly what Ken Shamrock does. Dan Severn drives in, Shamrock wraps the guillotine, and suddenly the bigger wrestler is the one in danger. Severn taps at 2001 forward. Shamrock becomes the first UFC Superfight Champion, and for this moment, the world's most dangerous man nickname feels less like hype and more like fact.
Twice, so it means that he probably has much more technique than...
Let's go to Jeff.
I'm here with the victorious Ken Shamrock, winner of the Superfight. And
the Dan Severn win is peak early Shamrock. He does not beat an easy style. He beats a nightmare style, a larger, decorated wrestler who should be able to control him. For a moment here, the original broadcast tells you more than narration can. Listen to the room react as Shamrock takes the throne. At UFC 7, Ken Shamrock defends against Oleg Taktarov, the UFC 6 tournament winner. Oleg is dangerous because he is not just a striker being introduced to grappling. He is patient, tough, and comfortable in ugly submission exchanges. Shamrock is now facing people who understand the same danger he brings. Shamrock versus Oleg Taktarov becomes a long, draining title defense. Neither man gives the other the clean mistake. Neither man gets the finish. The fight goes 33 minutes and ends in a draw. Shamrock keeps the belt, but the fight shows how quickly the athletes were catching up to the original UFC format. That is the champion's problem. It is not enough for Ken Shamrock to be dangerous anymore. Oleg Taktarov knows the submission danger. He knows how to survive bad positions. Shamrock is still the champion, but UFC 7 proves that his path is getting harder because the field is learning fast. At UFC 8, Ken Shamrock gets one of the most visually perfect early UFC matchups, Kimo Leopoldo. Kimo is huge, intense, and already famous from an earlier brutal UFC war. The champion against the monster is easy to sell. For a few seconds, let the original matchup audio breathe.
Kimo has been keeping a low profile, training hard, and praying even harder. One champion could barely contain.
Kimo Leopoldo makes the fight messy because his size and strength are real problems. Ken Shamrock cannot treat him like a normal title defense. Every scramble carries danger, and every bad position can become a crisis. Kimo looks like a walking problem, but Shamrock stays patient enough to keep hunting the submission. Then Ken Shamrock finds the opening. He does not need the perfect striking exchange, and he does not need to outmuscle Kimo Leopoldo everywhere. He needs one limb, one angle, and one moment. At 40-24, Shamrock catches the knee bar and forces Kimo to tap.
All right, let's go to Jeff Blatnick right now. Jeff?
I'm with the victorious Ken Shamrock. And Ken, you said you were...
The Kimo Leopoldo win shows the complete early Shamrock package: pressure, patience, leg lock danger, and the ability to make a much larger opponent quit. Hold on the aftermath too. The post-fight audio is part of the texture of this era, before every title defense had the modern media machine around it. Then UFC 9 turns the story sideways. Ken Shamrock has already submitted Dan Severn once, and Severn wants the belt back. On paper, the rematch should be enormous. Before the cage door closes, listen to how the broadcast frames it: champion against challenger, guillotine win against revenge mission.
He is from Coldwater, Michigan. Let's listen to the reception.
Instead, Ken Shamrock versus Dan Severn goes 30 minutes and ends in a split decision for Severn. Shamrock loses the Superfight title. The crowd is frustrated, the debate starts immediately, and decades later it still feels like one of the strangest main events from the early UFC period. The important part is not only whether you think Ken Shamrock or Dan Severn deserved the decision. The important part is what the fight reveals. They know each other's danger now, and that knowledge makes the rematch cautious, tense, and ugly. UFC 9 shows the early rule set reaching its limits. Zoom out, and the record is still incredible for the era. Ken Shamrock's early UFC run is not a clean, undefeated legend. It is better than that. It is a 4-2-2 arc full of quick submissions, long draws, title pressure, and one controversial loss. That record is a map of early MMA evolving. Every opponent teaches the sport something, but the pattern is bigger than any one result. Strikers had to learn leg lock danger. Grapplers had to learn top control and patience. Wrestlers had to respect chokes. Bigger athletes had to respect technique. Shamrock's fights are like a rough draft of modern MMA strategy. That is why Ken Shamrock matters. He was not simply a scary guy from the old tapes. He was one of the first complete threats the UFC audience could understand. He made leg locks real, made the Superfight belt matter, and gave the early UFC rivalries that still carry weight. Modern fans can watch these fights and see awkward pacing, rough rules, and incomplete technique. That is fair. The sport has evolved massively. But you cannot understand that evolution without watching Ken Shamrock and the other pioneers force the sport to answer questions it had never asked before. Here is the final take. Ken Shamrock's early UFC run is one of the most important arcs in MMA history because it contains almost the whole origin story. The scary debut, the shocking loss, the revenge draw, the first Superfight title, the monster defense, the controversial title loss. If you love the raw early UFC era, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment with the next fighter you want in the series. We can go deeper on any early legend, any specific matchup, or any tournament that still feels unreal today. And be honest, was Ken Shamrock the first truly complete UFC fighter?